Hi, my name is Bill Modro. I'm head of special collections and university archives here at Miami University, and I would like to welcome everyone for today's presentation. Here today, gone tomorrow. Electronic Records Day webinar as Miami University Library celebrates Ohio Archives Month. I want to thank our library staff who helped organize this presentation, especially Jackie Johnson, University Archivist, and Sean Van Ness, Strategic Communications, for planning the lecture series. I also want to recognize our partners in this webinar, the Ohio Electronic Records Committee, Greene County Records Center and Archives, and Preservica. On behalf of Miami University Libraries, I want to thank them for their support. Before I introduce our moderator, I want to read Miami University's land acknowledgement and our statement on racism. Miami University is located within the traditional homelands of the Miami and Shawnee people, who, along with other indigenous groups, ceded these lands to the United States in the first Treaty of Greenville in 1795. The Miami people, whose name our university carries, were forcibly removed from these homelands in 1846. In 1972, a relationship between Miami University and the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma began and evolved into a reciprocal partnership, including the creation of the Miami Center at Miami University in 2001. The work of the Miami Center serves the Miami tribe community and is dedicated to the revitalization of the Miami language and culture and to restoring that knowledge to the Miami people. Miami University and Miami tribe are proud of this work and of the more than 140 Miami students who have attended Miami University since 1991 through the Miami Heritage Award Program. Miami University Libraries has a statement on racism. The libraries are a welcoming and inclusive and safe resource for every person in our community. We believe that Black Lives Matter, racism, violence, discrimination, oppression, and hatred are antithetical to our values, mission, and fundamental humanity, and will not be tolerated in any libraries, affiliated spaces, or services. We at the libraries must continue to listen, learn, and better understand injustice and the experiences of others in order to truly be a welcoming and inclusive resource for all. We are dedicated to doing the work necessary to be better allies of and advocates for the victims of injustice. Now it is my honor to introduce our moderator. Pari Swift is the University Records Manager for the Ohio State University. Prior to joining OSU, she served for 8 years as Senior Records Manager at the Ohio Attorney General's Office, building their records program from the ground up and partnering with IT and legal on multiple major initiatives. She began her records career at the Ohio Historical Society State Archives, where she spent 9 years as local government's record archivist and then as the assistant state archivist. She has served as chair of the Ohio Electronic Records Committee and of the governor-appointed Ohio Historical Records Advisory Board. She was president of the National Association of Government Archives and Records Administrators and of the Greater Columbus chapter of ARMA. She serves as NAGARA's treasurer, volunteers at NAGARA's Professional Development Committee, and as education seminar director for ARMA Greater Columbus. She received her BA from Wittenberg University and her master's in library and information sciences degree from the University of Pittsburgh. In 2014, she attained her certified records manager designation. In her free time, she leads her daughter's Girl Scout troop, is a council delegate, and a member of the local Girl Scout service unit team. I now turn it over to Pari.
I appreciate the introduction, Bill, and I am going to go off camera to save some bandwidth now that you know that there's a real person behind the screen here. So we appreciate this opportunity to celebrate Electronic Records Day, and as well as Ohio Archives Month. Electronic Records Day was designed to raise awareness among state government agencies and the general public related to professional organizations and other stakeholders about the crucial role in electronic records and the role that those electronic records play in the world, in our everyday lives, in our work, and our home lives. We are partnering on this workshop with the Ohio Electronic Records Committee, which has been around since 1998. The mission of the Ohio Electronic Records Committee is to identify best practices and developing resources concerning the creation and maintenance and long-term preservation and access to electronic records of Ohio's public entities. So that could be state agencies, local governments, higher education, any public entity. The work is good work, and it contains really valuable resources. We put a little bit of a focus on public entities, though. The Ohio Electronic Records Committee membership has a diverse set of backgrounds and experiences surrounding public records. In addition to archivists and records management from state, county, and other types of local government agencies, our members come from academic libraries, historical societies, and universities. Some of us are archivists and records managers, while others are technical experts. Some are veterans in public sector and legal arenas, and we all combine to use our knowledge and experiences to guide others through processes in order to speed the adoption and standardization of certain technologies and those ever-changing technologies. So it's our hope at the ERC that others will use the information that we create in order to avoid technology and policy potholes. As you can see here, we have a lot of guidance and documentation. We create guidelines and resources around electronic records management and archives topics for public entities. Some, as you'll see on the left-hand side, are longer technical guidelines, while others are just 1 to 2 page tip sheets, or like I like to call them elevator speeches, highlighting electronic records issues. These are meant to bridge that communication gap that sometimes exists between records professionals, IT, and administration. Today's Electronic Records Day presentation stems from one particular issue. As records professionals, the Ohio Electronic Records Committee had been noticing that a lot of state and local governments tend to think of document management systems as archiving systems. Too often we hear of business units scanning so that they can keep things forever, or IT departments talking of archiving in the daily use document management system, or even a near or an offline system. There's a misconception that simply by having a record in electronic format, it will live forever without any sort of further intervention. In fact, just this morning, I had a conversation with somebody who had this very thought that just by putting it in electronic format, it was going to be able to live forever. So, out of concern for the long-term preservation of historical electronic records, in 2020, the Ohio ERC put together a 2-page tip sheet on the differences between document management systems and digital preservation systems to try to more easily explain the difference. And that brings us to today, Electronic Records Day and Archives Month 2022. We're stepping up the education in this area by inviting experts in the field to discuss the differences between document management systems and digital preservation systems, and the importance of digital preservation systems for the long-term survival of permanent electronic records. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our 2 subject matter experts. Lori Ashley is an independent consultant and change agent specializing in records management and digital preservation practices. She served 4 years as Preservica's Industry Market Development Manager, where she analyzed cross-industry and cross-sector requirements to inform marketing expert efforts and the product roadmap. Lori is a longtime member of AIM, the Society of American Archivists, and ARMA International. She is co-developer of a digital preservation capability maturity model and a web-based self-assessment tool that has been used by the U.S. Council of State Archivists, ICA's section of international organizations, and more than 250 private and public sector organizations to educate, advocate, and advance electronic records and historical preservation initiatives. After Lori presents, Robin Heise from Greene County will give us a little bit of a case study. Robin received a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology and Psychology and a Master of Higher Education Administration at The Ohio State University. After spending 14 years working in administrative positions within higher ed, she enrolled in the Public History Graduate Program at Wright State University. Robin received her master's degree in Public History from Wright State in June 2012. Robin's background has provided her with a unique combination of administration, records management, and archival experiences. She has been the records manager and archivist for Greene County, located in Xenia, Ohio, since 2015. In 2019, Robin was appointed by Governor DeWine as a member of the Ohio Historical Records Advisory Board, where she's currently co-chair of the Advocacy Committee and has led the Archival Fellowship programs in both 2018 and 2021. Robin also serves as a board member of the Ohio County Archivists and Records Managers Association and is active in the Miami Valley Archives Roundtable and the National Association of Government Archives and Records Administrators. Under Robin's leadership, the Greene County Record Center and Archives began focusing on electronic records preservation in 2019, serving as a beta tester for the Preservica starter product. In early 2022, Greene County upgraded to the professional cloud product and to date has ingested 2.6 million electronic files into their electronic preservation system. So with that, I am excited to hear from both Lori and Ashley. So I will turn it over to Lori. Thank you.
Thank you, Pari, and thank you, Bill. I'm really glad to join a couple of overachievers today, Pari and Robin. And I want to express my appreciation to the Ohio ERC and to Miami University for allowing me to be with you and celebrating electronic records today. So during the next 10 or 15 minutes or so, I want to talk about some key features and major workflows that characterize digital preservation systems in order to compare and contrast them to document and content management systems. So first of all, I want to begin by acknowledging that government record-keeping rules are robust and comprehensive. So along with the legal requirements from the Ohio Sunshine Law that you see on the left, there are a couple of bits of the great guidance that the Ohio Electronic Records committee has issued, which Pari referred to, that address these impacts of electronic record keeping. So managing public permanent records, of which there are many, many different types, is a core function of government and is routinely performed by archives, libraries, records management units, and agencies. So permanent records must remain accessible, authentic, and reproducible forever, and that's a very tall order. So of course, we've successfully mastered preservation techniques on paper and film. Those are eye-readable media. But now we have to master the art and science of digital preservation at the same high level of trustworthiness as our best analog record-keeping systems. And so these are just a few of the things which everyone on the call is well aware of, that these things just need to roll forward in time and be preserved and accessible regardless of administration or custodians. These are public records and they belong to people. So we have to keep them moving forward far, far into the future. So modern information ecosystems are admittedly complex and dynamic. This graphic shows just a few of the common digital systems that operate at all levels and across all branches of government. Documents created electronically or converted from paper or film are managed not only in dedicated EDRM and content management platforms like Microsoft 365, but also in many special applications. And Sean, if you'll click once, you'll see some dots go, some circles come on, there you go, which these are not electronic document management systems per se, but they're all kinds of systems that would hold digital surrogates of paper documents, or they would have their databases, which also hold what we know as documents, the kinds of things we're used to holding and seeing. So the issue of knowing, which documents must be preserved in the age of digital transformation of government operations and services is clearly a critical one. So you heard me say long-term and permanent electronic records. So a fair question is, what is long-term? I came to my aha moment about electronic records preservation while working at a regulated gas and electric utility. So those of you on the call which represent public utilities, the transportation systems, or infrastructure, this case will resonate with you. So the graphic you see on the right relates to a nuclear power plant that was operated for 40 years in Green Bay, Wisconsin, before being sold during deregulation and then subsequently closed. And what you see here are the dates when the decommissioning, so the record keeping that went along with operating this plant for 40 years, the decommissioning of the plant won't even begin until 2069 and is not expected to be done until 2073. So if you were an engineer that was at the plant in 2013, you're going to be long gone before the decommissioning activities start. So when I say long-term, It doesn't have to be permanent to have the need for digital preservation. The digital preservation community worldwide uses a definition over on the left, which comes from an ISO standard, and it's long enough to be concerned about the impacts of changing technology, which is a pretty short period of time and may extend indefinitely. The storage network folks came up with a 10 to 15 year marker. So when we say long-term or permanent records, we're talking about documents that are born electric, born digital, that have a retention period in excess of 10 years, or content that's already been around for 10 years that has to be retained going forward and may need some preservation actions to take place. So when we think about electronic records, permanent and long-term are the same but different. The requirements and techniques for preserving long-term and permanent electronic records are the same. The differences come in legal custody and access. And I think this is the point that Pari emphasized in the beginning, is it's not just for archivists and librarians now to maintain and preserve digital records. We need this activity to be happening much further upstream when these documents are in the custody of a third party, certainly in the custody of the agency or department that created them, because they may never go to an archive. They may be operational records that are permanent or long-term. And so we need a more robust approach to digital preservation that doesn't happen long after the records become inactive and are ready for transfer to an archival institution. So this is kind of the point of let's make sure we understand what a preservation system offers that might be different than a content management system. Okay, next slide. And the reason for all of this comes down to something pretty obvious, which is digital fragility. Electronic records depend on hardware and software to be created and managed and stored and rendered into the future. And of course, technology, both hardware and software, is subject to refresh cycles, for upgrades, for decommissioning. And so all of this puts electronic records that need to hang around for a while at risk. There's also the risk of file format obsolescence. Some file formats are owned by vendors, and they can decide at some point in time that they no longer wish to continue support for them. Also, we have the issue of successive custodians. If you have a permanent record, that means lots of people will need to be in charge of keeping the storage media intact and those records indexed and available. And so what is the handoff between successive generations of custodians and technology systems? And unfortunately, sometimes there just becomes a lack of oversight, governance, or funding to support long-term repositories. So all these things sort of eat away at our confidence level of being able to keep long-term electronic records permanently. So as we compare and contrast document management and digital preservation systems, it's probably helpful to step back and review considerations in the life cycle management of public records over this time and custodians. So here are a few that will be familiar to everyone on the call that relate to use, reuse, retention, access, and storage. They have to do with where they created and received. How often are they modified? How often are they accessed? Who needs to use them? Are they sent outside the organization? How fast does a retrieval need to be? What is the retention period? So as you think about your record series and the ones that you're maintaining, these are just some of the basic questions that we always ask about records. And it's been a common practice to take long-term records or very highly valuable records to film or even to retain them in paper. And so what are the preservation mandates and standards that are enforced in your jurisdiction? So these are also a couple of considerations which relate to records maintenance and use. So is the life of the records longer than the system in which they're currently stored? This is a common occurrence. Do they need to be migrated to a different system or to a different custodian? Will they be converted during their life? It's not an uncommon practice for people to say, turn a final record into a PDF because that's a stable format. What about all that metadata that tells us the context, why it was created, who created it, what it relates to? I'm pretty sure that in your jurisdictions, the hardware and software updates are regularly performed, but it may not always be connected to where the content is stored or the users who are in need of getting access to the records. And then how is all of this maintained and documented across the life cycle? And what you see here, these are from the National Archives, and you probably all know that the National Archives is no longer going to accept paper records from federal agencies after December 31st, either in their records centers or for transfer for archival preservation. So let's get down to the nitty-gritty and let's look at what it takes to future-proof electronic records, which is the specialty of digital preservation systems. So when we talk about future-proofing electronic records, we mean long-term error-free storage of digital information. When you go to retrieve it, all the bits and bytes are there. It's renderable, it's authentic, it's exactly what it was that you put away the day that you put it away. And this has to happen. This retrieval and interpretation has to be possible over the entire lifespan of the content, which, as we said, includes many, many permanent records. Of course, it applies to born digital content as well as content that's been converted to digital form. And there's an awful lot of digitalization that's been going on in the public sector now for quite a while. And that really speaks to the ease of access you can get to an electronic file, whereas if it's film or paper, you have to go to the physical place where that's stored in order to access it. So our users today they want their work at hand, they want easy access, they want to be able to retrieve the documents, even if they were created a long time ago, that fuels their work. And we want them to be able to do that in order to serve the public. So future-proofing or digital preservation is a combination of policies and strategies, technologies, workflows, and committed actions that ensure access to digital information over time. So I'm here today representing Preservica, and I worked for Preservica for 4 years and I'm still considered a good friend of the family. So Preservica is a provider of on-premise and cloud digital preservation software, and that software has been purpose-built to protect long-term and permanent digital assets of all types, not just documents. Preservica's software is used by thousands of corporate, cultural heritage, public sector, and not-for-profit organizations around the world, including 26 US state archives. And you can see here 1,094 file formats preserved and over 350 million assets protected. Really some crazy, wonderful assets. You can see the names here of the world-class institutions that use the software. So most of Preservica's customers use their active digital preservation platform in the cloud. And so their offerings range from free for a starter version up to very large scalable enterprise systems, including some which are running on GovCloud. All of these solutions provide ingest, file migration, integration with record creating systems, flexible metadata schemes, and access portals. In the time that I have left, I want to briefly highlight 4 key functions and workflows that distinguish digital preservation systems from document and content management systems. And then I'll wrap up with a short video that Preservica created in collaboration with ARMA International, which provides a quick review. So I'm going to put these under the umbrella of good preservation practice. So information exists independently of the way it's recorded, but we can only interpret, extract, and preserve that information if we know how it is recorded. So the way digital information is recorded is a file format. And you can see in these graphics, there's a lot happening behind the scenes in file format. What you see on your screen may be a nice, pretty Word document that you can edit and manage versions of in your content management system. But underneath, what's being recorded is this kind of stuff, and it has to be known and managed for preservation to take place. So the way we store and identify data is not just looking at file extensions. It requires numerous tools to identify and ensure the authenticity of records. On the left is an MP4 file. So that's the video, the bits and stream that we watch in videos. And some of the information you'll see is almost human readable, but all of the audio and video will be binary encoded. In the lower left is a zip file, right, which we're all familiar with. So the format is extensively documented, but the encoding is all binary. Each file has a local header, and then at the end, there's a central directory and an index. And then in the upper right, there's a scalable vector graphic, which is an XML format, which there's lots of human readable text in an XML format, but the design elements are vectors or long lists of numbers that you can't understand just by reading. So we can't preserve an electronic record unless we know its guts, its very foundation and formation. And so a good preservation practice has to include understanding file formats, not just the extension, but also managing the metadata that goes along with each of these files, these digital objects, and linking that metadata over time with that object for as long as it has to be retained. Another good preservation practice that happens is technical characterization. So while a digital preservation system like Preservica can ingest, store, and manage the metadata around any kind of content, digital content, without knowing what it is, we can't determine how to care for the digital assets over time without technical characterization. So characterization is an out-of-the-box automated feature of a digital preservation system. What happens is on ingest, the file formats are identified against a technical registry, which you see here on the left, pronom. So it removes all human error and assumptions about what file format the content is and its technical characteristics. The content's analyzed so it can be identified in all the properties identified and reported. For example, with that MP4 file that I talked about, properties such as duration, audio and video streams, frame rates, code names, aspect ratios, and much more will be automatically captured on ingest and stored as technical metadata. And this is not work that a human can do manually, and it's much too detailed to do without computers. So what happened is when the file is stored into a digital preservation system, the real nature of it, its true technical format, is captured in all of the details so that it can be managed over time. And this must be captured. This information is essential to making those preservation actions that will keep these assets viable over long periods of time and many, many technology changes. The third good practice is bit level preservation and integrity checking. So during ingest into a digital preservation system, workflows perform quality assurance actions that include virus checking and the creation of a checksum or a unique ID that's stored as metadata and used over and over during the lifetime of the assets to verify that not a single bit has been changed. So what you see here is a scan of a contract, and down below MD5 and SHA-1 are examples of those digital fingerprints that are generated, become associated with the file, stored in metadata, and then checked over time, either automatically or on a manual schedule, to make sure that nothing has happened. This means preservation happens down to the bit level because each of the ones and zeros in binary encoding is essential to preservation and use over time. So the last good practice, automated file format migration. So everyone has likely experienced what happens when you try to open a legacy file on your computer. You get an error message because the system no longer knows how to treat it or open it. To preserve electronic records, we must deliberately move formats forward before we see prompts from operating systems. Digital preservation systems like Preservica have powerful migration tools so that file format migrations can be done automatically or manually. What you see on the left is a screenshot of Preservica where the original file has been retained, and then additional representations have been generated for preservation access. And this is just standard stuff for a preservation system. It will be done in, and Bill can talk to you about what happens in libraries and archives. Sometimes there's a preservation master, which might be a very large file, but in order for a document or photograph to be rendered easily on a website, a more compressed file format will be stored. And so digital preservation systems can do this kind of work at scale automatically. What you see on the left is guidance from the National Archives on preferred file formats for preservation. So now let's play a short video which brings all of this together and reviews how electronic records become future-proof. There it goes. Just a quick review, fixity and integrity checking. All this is happening during ingest automatically in a digital preservation system. The file format is characterized, examined against a technical registry and captured in metadata. Metadata is always linked to the object, a really critical thing. It's what fuels retrieval and discovery in digital preservation systems. And then there's the option to normalize to preferred formats or to migrate over time. And then it's very common in digital preservation systems, especially in the cloud, to have redundant self-healing storage so that if during one of those file integrity checks, anything is off, the file can be restored using a different, using the original file. So one more slide here for me, and then I'll turn it over. So digital preservation systems are not limited to documents, but are capable of handling any digital assets, such as emails, websites, social media posts, database, video, audio files, and spatial maps. Longevity of digital information is not simply a backup of data, because file format, software and hardware obsolescence, and other organizational and financial issues must be considered. Long-term and permanent documents and other information assets that are born digital or digitized with years of retention left can't wait for decades for preservation action to be taken. So this is just a different way of looking at it that's easily in the life cycle and capture. We could think about putting born permanent content into a repository or taking preservation action. I hope you learned some resources there if you want to take a look. But now over to Robin. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lori. Hi, my name is Robin Heise. I am going to share my screen here momentarily and walk you through the journey Greene County took for electronic records preservation. So again, I'm the records manager and archivist at the Greene County Archives in Xenia. For those of you who are not familiar with us, the Greene County Records Center, we currently house over 3,100 boxes, 4,700 books, about 3,000 maps, 100 artifacts, and about 14,000 rolls of microfilm. So one of our goals here at the archives is to ensure the availability and accessibility of the historical and genealogical records to the public. We also advise county offices and agencies on the management, retention, disposition, storage, and preservation of their records. Electronic records have been on my radar for a few years, but I'm going to be honest, I've been procrastinating and dealing with them until I absolutely had to. I don't have a technological bone in my body, and the thought of dealing with digital preservation honestly terrified me. So it might seem a little bit odd, but our journey to electronic records preservation here in Greene County revolves around some of our local natural disasters. I think you can probably see on your screen here on the black and white image, that is an image of the well-known 1974 F5 tornado that devastated the city. This tornado was part of the 1974 super outbreak that created 148 tornadoes in 13 different states. When the archives was created in 1996, many departments transferred a variety of records documenting the April 3rd tornado. Among our records, we've got photographs, photographic slides, scrapbooks, resolutions, financial records, etc., all documenting the destruction and the renewal after the storm hit. So based on the technology of the time, we here at the archives have a physical analog record documenting the events of that day and the cleanup afterwards. Records were either transferred here to the archives when it was established, they were found at a later time, or they already existed within some of our records we hold in our collection. And one example of that would be our commissioners' meeting minutes. So we fast forward from 1974 to the night of May 27th, 2019, when several F3 tornadoes hit Beaver Creek. And that's the other image you're seeing on the screen here. While the tornadoes did not directly impact the Records Center or other county offices, the images and records documenting the damage sustained throughout Greene County certainly have historical value. It was this disaster that made me realize that because of the technological advancements, it was going to be up to us here at the archives to document this disaster. These records were now electronic, and they were generally stored on a personal device. We wouldn't have or be transferred the physical record that we had been historically. Records Center staff were literally going to have to work to ensure that these electronic records were transferred into our collection. So just to give you some perspective, what you're seeing on the screen now, these are both images of damage assessment reports. As you can see, we have the paper analog record documenting the damage of the 1974 tornado. And then we also have the digital assessment documenting the 2019 tornado. So I'll talk a little bit more about the 2019 electronic damage assessment tool here in a few minutes. So as I said, it became really clear that we were going to have to be very proactive here at the archives in order to get access to these records. Obviously, I didn't want to interfere with the recovery efforts after the 2019 tornado, so I waited until August to actually reach out to all the county offices and departments. In the meantime, archive staff began looking at the records from previous disasters to make an educated guess of the types of records that we should be looking for. As I mentioned earlier, due to the technology changes, I knew that photographs and videos of the destruction left behind from the 2019 storm would be saved on personal cell phones and hard drives. Most people don't print off photographs these days, so it was doubtful that anyone would be creating a scrapbook of the event. So because of this, the archives would not have access to these records without asking for help. So I sent out an email to all county employees asking for them to share any photographs, video, or other records documenting the May 27th tornadoes. The response that I received was absolutely amazing. We used an STP server similar to Dropbox for individuals to save the files on so that we could access them and then transfer them onto our servers. So what I'm going to show you now are just a few of the images and records that we received. So we received a large number of aerial photographs illustrating the damage that were taken the day after the tornado hit by our sheriff's office. As you can see here, there were fires from damaged gas lines and debris everywhere. So the Parks Department also sent up a drone to catch some good aerial footage of the damage to one of their parks. And this is just one example that I will show you. So you get an idea of the devastation of the park. Lots of trees down, buildings damaged. And again, without us actually contacting somebody in parks, we would have never had access to this. We also realized early on that our auditor's office had an online damage assessment tool. This tool illustrated the number of homes and businesses that were damaged within the county. The tool also illustrated the severity of said damage. And if you notice at the bottom, it shows you that 86 buildings were destroyed. We had 206 with major destruction, 395 with minor, 756 buildings in total were affected, and one was inaccessible. And the closer you got into this program, you could actually dive down to the property level and take a look at the damage report. In 1975 or 74, as I showed you before, these damage assessments were all on paper and they were eventually transferred to the archives. So I contacted our auditor's office about making sure we could capture this data, and I was told that the digital tool was only temporary and would eventually be deleted from the website. So this great visual data would be gone forever. So one of my staff members painstakingly went through the tool to capture over 1,400 images of the property damage across the county. The auditor's office did provide us with a spreadsheet that listed all the parcel IDs so that we could ensure that we captured all of the data on the site. So since then, this data has now been uploaded to Preservica for long-term preservation. So as part of our journey, I spent 2 years discussing electronic record preservation with our data processing office. We went back and forth with them until ultimately they determined that they were not going to be able to meet our needs. Initially, they wanted us to just put the electronic files out on their server so that we knew it was being backed up. Well, that provided a great storage location. They were unable to migrate as system changed. So they also really didn't want to maintain TIFF files because of the space needed to store them. And eventually the director asked me why we were maintaining so much dead data. Well, from their perspective, the historical electronic records that we were maintaining were not accessed on a regular basis. And so therefore they were just taking up space on the servers and costing the county money. We were looking at this obviously from a very different perspective. Yes, this is inactive data. It may not be accessed on a regular basis, but we're required to maintain these records based on their administrative, legal, or historical value. So while all of this was going on, we became a beta tester for the Preservica starter product, and we were working on determining how an electronic preservation system would benefit us here in Greene County. We had numerous electronic records that had previously been transferred to us from our Parks and Trails department. These files were permanent, they were historical, and among them, there were 2 years worth of newsletters documenting the history of that 2-year history of the Parks Department. Among these were some images electronic files that were created in PageMaker. They had a PMD extension. So I checked with data processing to determine if they had a way to convert these files for long-term preservation Obviously, I couldn't open them on my desktop. Data processing couldn't help us. They didn't have a way to do that. So I decided, since we were a beta tester with Starter, I was going to upload one on the Starter to see what would happen. And lo and behold, it migrated the file. I was able to open it. So here's the Parks newsletter, the cover and the first page that I was unable to open anywhere else. This particular situation actually is what made data processing change their mind on digital preservation. They realized how important it was at this point and they got on board. So now it was time for me to start doing research among our county offices and departments to see if this tool would actually come in handy across the county. So as I said at the beginning of the presentation, I don't have a technical bone in my body and neither do most of my staff. So we needed a product that was really simple to use. I use the Starter product as an opportunity, not only to learn how to ingest records into a preservation system, but also as an opportunity to show other departments how an electronic preservation system could benefit them. Not just the preservation aspect, but also by providing access to customers, both the public and internally some of the staff. So I worked with data processing to estimate the initial amount of storage that we would need and how quickly that storage we would need to increase it. I had to then persuade the county administrators, the commissioners, the data board, and the microfilm board. At this point, I'm going to make a plug for Pari and ERC and say that I used the ERC tip sheet just to help me do that. It was very helpful. Through all of this, I would have never imagined that a tornado and COVID, as a matter of fact, would have been the catalyst needed to actually begin preserving electronic records here in Greene County. But after we started showing county offices and departments how the system worked, we really had a lot of interest. And as you can see here, our commissioners are using it, our engineers' office is on board. The sheriff's office is interested in using it. Domestic relations court will be on board next year. Clerk of courts, the list goes on and on and on. So we just had amazing feedback from all our departments. So I just want to really quickly show you, this is a look at our dashboard in Preservica. You can customize each folder based on the department's needs. There's a variety of security settings, so closed records can remain closed and open records can be available to the public. One example of closed records, our clerk of courts, they received all of their records on CD, but they were never indexed. And so staff could never find anything. So we've been actually taking those records off of the CD, putting them out on Preservica, adding the metadata, and then now clerk of court staff actually can go in and search for records, and they're finding things much easier than they have been before. And the other feature that I really love in Preservica is that anytime somebody deletes a file, I get an email from Preservica and I'm required to either approve or reject the request. This is great because it means that nobody can inadvertently delete a file without ensuring that they're following our record destruction process. So just to give you some idea, I know when Pari introduced me, she said at that point that I had sent her my bio. We had ingested 2.6 million files. We've been working on this since February. We are over 3 million files, as you can see here. And this report was run at the end of September, so we're probably closer to 3.5 million at this point. So again, we had no idea how many records, and these are just our daily court records and weekly court records that are going in right now. We haven't even hit the tip of the iceberg yet with ingesting records. So then just to give you an idea, this is the public side. This is what the public sees when they go out to our digital repository. You can customize this how you want to make sure you're meeting your own needs. We're still working on, like I said, getting the records out there and adding the metadata. I have to get a plug for our volunteers. They have been so helpful in getting the metadata out there. We only have 3 staff members who've added these, 3 million files. So we've been keeping pretty busy. And our volunteers, the system is easy enough. Our volunteers have been able to go out and learn it, and they're able to add the metadata for us. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. So turn it back over to Pari so we can head to some questions. And I'd like to thank the Ohio Electronic Records Committee for allowing me to present today, and also Miami University for hosting.
All right. Thank you, Robin. And thank you, Lori. Very interesting to hear about from the expert on the differences between document management and digital preservation, and really interesting to see the work that Greene County has been doing in this regard. If you have any questions that you would like to address to Lori or Robin or myself, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. So down at the bottom of your screen, next to the participants icon, you'll see that Q&A. Go ahead and put that in there, and we will address those questions. While people are putting their questions into the chat, let me go ahead and ask Robin and Lori, if you had to give your elevator speech articulating the legal value of having a digital preservation system separate from a document management system, what would that elevator speech be? What keywords would you use in your elevator speech?
I don't know if I can give you the whole speech, but I would say it's a secure system. It's a trustworthy system. And I know initially when we started ingesting records into the system as an archivist and a records manager, it really terrified me to actually, after I ingested it, I made sure it was in Preservica. It terrified me to actually go and delete that file. I'm getting better. I'm learning to, I trust the system now, but it's very trustworthy. I know, like I said, I know the data is secure there.
And I guess I would add that the a digital preservation system, because it's purpose built to do large scale automated preservation over time, reduces the burden on the users. I mean, I think Pari, I know from your experience, you would say that it's hard for users to always do the right thing with records retention and management. And so it's the same with preservation. So what this does is it's more efficient, it uses storage more efficiently, and it takes away the burden, but brings the benefits to the users of ensuring that what it is that they need to do their work is preserved without them having to take the care to do.
Thank you. And I would add some terms that I use in talking about it. I think somebody said reliable, authentic, making sure that we have authentic records, that we can prove that they're the same records over time without having been changed. And I see we have some questions coming in the chat. Other than Starter, what services are available for smaller institutions with limited budgets?
Well, I think that, and Robin can please join in, but I think, all the tools that are integrated and embedded in Preservica are available open source and can be done manually. So if you're just starting out, you can do things like running hash digests and doing file integrity checks, migrating to file formats. You can do those sorts of things in a more manual way, and it's good practice to get started. So I think look at open source tools, and then I think join a community of people that are doing the same thing that you need to do, because they've got great tips and techniques for how to get it done for smaller institutions.
Absolutely.
Where would one find those communities? I think through the professional associations, CARMA, the Association of County Folks in Ohio, but the Society of American Archivists, regional archives groups, library groups, historical societies. There are all sorts of practitioners out there that are making do with limited resources. I wish there were more resources for archives and libraries, but there's lots of communities out there that can help you with some good practices.
Right, and I believe Nagara is another one of those that has some community forums. All right, what file formats are the records stored in Preservica?
Here in Greene County right now, we have ingested, as I showed you, we have the PageMaker files out there. We have TIFF files, JPEG, PDF. We have had some CAD files that I've been able to convert and then ingest those in there. So we have a large number. We also have MP3s. Our Veteran Services Department, they record their meetings every month. And so we put the audio recordings out there. And we will be also uploading some videos as well up there. So
yeah, so those are all the usual suspects, right, of electronic record formats. So in Preservica repositories around the world, there's more than almost 1,200 file formats that are currently stored. And again, the technical registry that's used to characterize file formats has over 1,600 file formats. So there's no limit. It's any and every file format, databases, legacy files for which the applications no longer exist. What happens in Preservica is that the original file is ingested intact. It's always maintained. And then additional representations are made over time. You can do it automatically, or you can set policy and it can be done on ingest or later on. And so it's any and every file format under the planet, on the planet, basically.
The next question says, I've been working with computers far before there was an operating system. Archives and libraries believed that microfilm was the preservation solution. Agencies microfilmed and without any quality control destroyed the original records. Underexposed, overexposed, missing pages, nitrate had been destroyed, millions of records because we can't go back and fix the problem. And yeah, even when we were talking about microfilm lasts a long time, we said, it can last 100 years. Would you change anything about the way we talked about microfilm versus the way we are now talking about these long-term electronic records in a digital preservation system?
I guess, for digitization and for filming, I think, the bottom line is you have to have a quality process, right? So when we transform to filming or digitizing, there was a lot of emphasis, and I know Nagara and COSA put out some great documentation about the importance of establishing and documenting the standards that are being used. Because to the point of the person who asked the question, there's a lot of bad images out there, and bad images don't get you back to the original record. And so that's a really sad story. So I think regardless of the system, we need to have good standards, consistent standards, and we have to do no harm to the records, right? We have to be able to migrate them forward, whatever format they're in. So it's a very sad situation. It's happened a lot. And I think the digital preservation systems are built to be super robust to try to get around those issues. But there's still and Robin can speak to it, a quality control aspect for digital preservation systems to make sure that what you put in is what you got in, right?
There absolutely is. We never realized until we started working with the electronic records that how bad some of the images on our old microfilm was. Our clerk of courts, for example, once they film a record, it's destroyed. We get the microfilm for permanent retention, and we never really go back and look at it. But we've started going back and looking at them, and the images, some of them you can't even read them, but now the paper's gone and all we're stuck with are these, bad images on microfilm. So we've made sure as we're ingesting records out onto Preservica that the images are good quality, a high quality image, and we're not just putting anything out there. We're making sure the images are rotated and that the metadata is added correctly. So 50 years from now, somebody who's sitting in my seat will actually know what they're looking at.
Thank you. It looks like we have time for maybe one more question. And the question is, how do you manage records that are active? So if they are exported and ingested into Preservica early in their life cycle, is that just a snapshot of the record at that moment? If there are changes to the record, how do you have to ingest those separately? So how does that work? Or do you not ingest until you have the final version?
I can tell you here in Greene County, we treat Preservica just like we treat our shelves on the archives. We only take in inactive records. So if the record is still active, we don't want it yet. We want to make sure that what's going into Preservica or on our shelves is the final record.
Yeah, and I think absolutely what goes into Preservica needs to be something that's fixed, right? That's a key consideration. So what we're seeing is that the line is moving. In fact, Preservica is working on an integration with Microsoft 365 right now so that a record based on its policy could be sent into the preservation repository and accessible through the Microsoft 365 discovery tools. So what we're seeing is that sometimes there's a record early in its life cycle, you're going to have to keep it. You can send it to the repository and keep a copy close by, and then just let that copy in the operational system go. So we're seeing a shakeup really of what's going on. You can also you can put in a record, this is happening in a large county. You can put a property record, maybe there's an amendment that has to happen. So you keep the original and then you add the amended file and you link them together forever. So there are some techniques where you can put records in sooner. You can also deaccession records out of Preservica. So really, there's a number of different ways through policy and strategies that you can manage putting records in that won't necessarily stay there forever or that will need to be changed. So thanks, great question.
We've talked a lot about digital preservation in a more professional sense. How can the average person preserve their own digital information, such as manuscripts, drafts, family photos, family information?
So I think one answer is to follow the guidance of the experts like NARA and other national archives and local and state archives, local archives about the best file formats. And you want to do no harm. So you want to put things into file formats that can be migrated forward. Preservica has a free starter product, so you can get a preservation system for nothing. There is a limit of 5 gigabytes before there's a subscription fee. But I think go and look at what the tools are and leverage them the best you can for your own personal collections. And you can get a long way doing the right thing with good practices.
So this is our old emancipation record that is in Preservica right now. So I want to just give you an idea. So if you've got manuscripts or family photos, I want to give you an idea. This is the cover. You can browse through. Give it a minute. They're large images. So you could easily use this, I would think, for family history and manuscripts. Let me get to a page with a lot of writing on it. You can zoom in just to give you an idea of what the record looks like. So I would think this would be really helpful for, the starter program would be great for family history.
Congratulations, Robin. It's been a while since I've seen your archive and it's fantastic. Congratulations on your success.
Thank you.
All right, well, I have a whole list of people that I want to thank. I want to thank Robin and Lori for their expertise and sharing with us today. I also want to thank the Miami University Libraries, Bill and Jackie and Sean, for setting this up and hosting it. I think this was a great Electronic Records Day and Electronic Records Month presentation. So we thank you for attending today.